Each week, we are here on WVO Winton Talk Radio to discuss, along with my guests and those of you in radio listening land, the topics of today. We cover the whole waterfront of issues that affect our people. We talk about business, and we talk about economic development, and we talk about employment, and we talk about education, and we talk about human services, and we talk about medicine and medical care, and we talk about science and technology and communication. And yes, we talk about politics and religion. We have with us two guests today as we stand here at the eve of Dr. Martin Luther King's birthday. As you know, his birthday will be celebrated Monday, January 16th, right here, as well as across the entire United States of America. Our guests are going to help us reflect on Dr. King, what we learned from the powerful movement that he undertook during the mid-50s and 60s, and it washed into the 70s, even though he met an untimely death. And we'll talk about what we learned then and know now. And in particular, how do we apply Dr. King's principles today? Are they relevant any longer? And what does Dr. King say for the future? Oh, let's take it another way. What would Dr. King say if he were here right now? What would he challenge us, or would he challenge us at all? Is everything okay? And what would Dr. King forecast? What would his promised land and I've been to the mountaintop say for the future generations? We're going to talk about that today. And of course, to help us, we have two veterans in the whole effort to bring about racial justice and freedom in this land of ours. One, of course, is Reverend Dr. Jeanette Wilson, who is the executive director of Push Excel, working shoulder to shoulder with the Reverend Jesse Jackson in the Dr. King's workshop right there at 50th and Drexel. And of course, we have Reverend Dr. Marshall Hatch, pastor of New Mount Pilgrim Baptist Church. Each one of these, our guests, will have their own perspective. We have two because Dr. King has such a powerful scope and scale for us to try to unravel in a very short period of time. But before we begin, we'd like to ask each one of our guests to not only speak to the issues, but we'd like to kind of understand, for our younger people in particular, where you started. What motivated you to become what you are? Both of you have achieved doctorate degrees, subsequent to master's degrees and baccalaureate degrees. Both of you have gone through some preparation for the ministry, and yet you have chosen this line of work. We need to know where you start from and how to connect with you. And I particularly want our younger people to know that these two great leaders are both African American, one female and the other male. So we're going to start off, as always, with our ladies first. And let me introduce just for a moment Reverend Dr., and I should say Reverend Dr. Attorney Jeanette Wilson. Reverend Wilson.
Good afternoon, Dr. Finney, and I'm indeed glad to be a part of this program. I was alive and a teenager when Dr. King was most active. He was my hero. I did not get excited about many of the singers or the entertainers of the day, but Dr. King was my hero because when he spoke, they said there were three men in the world that when they spoke, the world stopped and listened. Dr. King, Winston Churchill, and Dwight Eisenhower. I didn't care about Churchill. I didn't care about Eisenhower, and they were leaders of nations. Dr. King led the world and with such moral authority, and just to see a black man who could speak and use the words that he used, it just impressed me. And the fact that he had a PhD in his 20s, I just felt like to be a great leader, you had to follow in his footsteps, and education was just
Right.
the basis of everything.
Right.
And he never flaunted his education. He just wore it like a rag. And so that's why I just admired him so much. With all of the things that we were faced in the South, I rode on the back of the bus. I have ridden in the segregated cars going from Chicago to Tennessee, as you have going from Chicago to Mississippi,
All
where
right.
when you reached Cairo, you had to leave the dining car and go sit in the coach with the
So you actually did, in fact, experience personally segregation.
I saw colored water and white water. Same color water, but it had a sign on it, so I couldn't drink from the left side because it said white only. And when you got off the train in Dyersburg, Tennessee, there was a black side and a white side to the train station. Same train.
So we got the motivation, but so where did you start from? Where did you go to grammar school or school? Are you a
went to-
Chicagoan?
I went to school in Chicago. I graduated from Dixon Elementary, Harlan High School, which was the Whitney Young of the city at that time. And my parents, grandparents, and the church members expected me to go to college. It was never a question in my household. I knew I was going to college. I knew I would graduate from college. My grandmother bought me a education policy when I was a child, and so she would show it to me every summer. And when I
When you say
graduated,
education policy, you mean an insurance policy?
an insurance policy so that I would get some money when I graduated from high school to go to college.
Is that
She
right?
had a 6th grade education, so it was in the culture of my family. And I just, I was the first one to graduate from college. The reason I used my maiden name is because I was the first one on my mother's side to be a lawyer, so it meant something. And they put me in the newspaper in Ripley, Tennessee, because I was a child of the South.
Is that right?
Yeah.
All right. Reverend Dr. Hatch, tell us about yourself.
Well, my life is a little different trajectory from Jeanette's. I grew up here in Chicago, actually the Jane Addams public housing, right over on the near west side of Chicago. Then
That's over there where Abla home?
I lived in Abla. I lived in Jane Addams, which
Okay.
was the original public housing in the country, built
Okay.
in 1938, not for African Americans originally, but for Italian immigrants and Jewish immigrants. And so, but that's where my formative years were. And I remember in that apartment, which my mom died in 1967, January. I was 8. And I was 10 when Dr. King was killed. And I remember looking at the funeral on television, on a black and white kind of flickering television. And really that was part of the beginning of Dr. King's impact. And little did I know as a kid growing up in 66, when I would have been 8, I remember hearing the name a couple of times. But in fact, Dr. King had organized all around the west side of Chicago, which is interesting because it's the west side that's probably been most disconnected from the black and white political and economic power bases.
One of those apartments.
He
over
lived
there.
at 15th and Hamlin. They're Dr. King legacy apartments. We consecrated that ground before building those apartments, which opened on last year. We had Marty the Third here last year. But Dr. King had organized all around the area that I grew up in, where my dad's church was, in East Garfield Park. And so I kind of,
Now, you're a
later.
son of a pastor?
Yeah, my dad pastored one church 42 years on the west side. Then I've been pastoring 27 years, so we kind of
You gotta wait.
Almost,
got a
almost
little
70 years
legacy.
between the two of you.
Absolutely.
All right, listen, I just want to get way in here because we don't have a whole lot of time. What did we learn from the civil rights movement led by Dr. Martin Luther King, Jr.? What are the lessons that we got from it? What were the principles, if you will, that Dr. King lifted up and maybe even concretized in our social memory? So much so that we celebrate his birthday every year, and we celebrate many other aspects of his life during Black History Month. But what do we get out of it in terms of what we could apply today? But let's first talk just for a minute, and either one of you can weigh in as to what you think that the lesson from Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s life and his struggle to bring about freedom and justice and equality here in these United States of America.
Yeah, I mean, those of us who, conscientious and of history, it's a sad irony every time this time of year, because most of the official commemorations or celebrations of Dr. King's birth, he would not be invited to in life. In actual life, I doubt that he would be invited to many of these official celebrations, because he so radically challenged the social and political order and the power structure of that day. And so the real courage that it takes to challenge power, to speak truth to power, I think is a great legacy of Dr. King, and also his sense of being a global citizen, and really his the broad scope. I think that Dr. King really defines in this century what it means to be a 21st century a global citizen and America who challenges the world.
Reverend Jeanette?
I think that Dr. King taught us really three things. One, prophets must speak truth to power, and the role of the church is to share the challenges that the people face with them, let them know when they are being oppressed, and then tell them how to respond to oppression in a nonviolent way. But it's not, and that you cannot adjust to it, you cannot ignore it, you must fight back. And everywhere he went, whatever church he was the pastor of, he was always educating the people. When he started at the church in Alabama, he was at a silk stocking church, and he challenged them with all the money and resources. They were the educated, upper class, middle class blacks, and it was out of that congregation that he pushed them into this march.
And weigh in on that.
Bus
And we often
boycott.
forget that that Dr. King was a pastor.
A regular
Absolutely.
pastor every day. He
Every
was
day.
pastor.
Just like people don't really know what they're talking about when they call Dr. King's preachments speeches.
They're not speeches.
They were sermons.
Their sermon.
They're sermons.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And if you read his preachments, if you will,
Yeah.
that people talk about, they're really sermons.
They're
They're
sermons.
sermons. And you
Because
see-
he was a pastor above all.
And you see the call and response, and he's always he was always quoting the Bible because he was preaching.
Okay, but here's the deal then. So what does that have to, both of you are members of the clergy, right? Both of you went and to seminary and received doctorate degrees. But as clergy now, what does Dr. King say to the church right now?
That you can't
Is it
sit
now time for another letter
from
the Birmingham jail?
But you got to go to jail for a cause to write the letter out. See, what we're doing is we're glad to be in the Rose Garden with the president. We're glad to be at a lunch or breakfast with the mayor. And I was telling somebody, it's not enough for you to say you were there with them. You must challenge even the politicians, whether the mayor, the president, the governor, to do well for the people. And you have to speak on the interests of the people. We got 12,000 homeless children in Chicago, and we're silent. 1 million homeless children go to school every day in America. Silence.
When you say silent, you're talking about the church
I'm
or
talking about
something?
the church. I'm talking about the religious leaders. It's not just to have a food kitchen. We got enough food in America. We throw away enough food to feed these children. I was talking to one of our bishops, who's a pediatrician, Bishop Horace Smith, and he said that the cost of grain and rice in the world is causing this global hunger when we could just feed the children. He says, so children are dying from malnutrition at a time in the 21st century where we got iPads, iPhones, and we can't feed these children. We can feed them, but we are overcharging for basic food.
But my question that gets back to the question is begged, You know, we all often get bashed. You know, I'm a member of the clergy as well. We often get bashed because we don't do enough. But it seems to me that we're here at a moment where the church has to do something different. Or what's your take on this?
Well, I mean, it is very challenging to organize clergy, and I'm a member of the clergy. I never fight people who challenge us or bash us, because you know that's one of the burdens of leadership is to take the arrows. But as one who's kind of been in the vineyards, I don't think I'm old enough to be a veteran yet, but it is very difficult to organize clergy. Because, and I think that's part of the brilliance of Dr. King. I mean, it was never a majority of the clergy.
He didn't have a majority either.
Not even in this town, when he came to this town. And so kind of taking
Well, as a matter of
literally
fact,
the
as
remnants.
I understand it, there
Most
were
preachers-
clergymen who did, in fact, oppose Dr. King coming to the city of Chicago.
Who absolutely opposed him. I mean, that's why I say, I mean, the strange irony, I don't know that Dr. King gets an invitation to the mayor's Dr. King prayer breakfast.
He would not have been invited.
He would not have been invited. And so you know.
Do you think he would have been invited to the breakfast that was just held by the mayor?
No,
No,
I don't think so.
no, Mayor
The
Daley.
Chicago movement for King was pivotal, as Taylor Branch brings out in his trilogy of the King years. It was that really turned King into a national leader. I mean, there were people who were really trying to regionalize him as just the head of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference. But his challenge of the American power structure
Yes.
really was a part of Chicago.
Yes.
And in fact, it was not considered a successful campaign, him being here. I mean, at the outset, it looked like Daily #1 had really gotten the best of King and sent him out of town packing. Because to really challenge the socioeconomic power structure and the assumptions and speaking truth to power is really radical, and I think that's what Dr. King was.
Now, you've written a book, haven't you?
Absolutely. That'll be out in the spring.
It'll be out in the spring. Now, does it deal with any of this?
Absolutely. It's called Project America. I mean, our real premise is that Dr. King really saved this country to some great degree, and that when we look at where the country is headed, black and brown children this year became the majority of the births in this country in a given year. This country is growing blacker and browner, and so if we don't save black and brown children, America will be lost.
Both of you have spoken to Dr. King and what he meant to you and early experiences and listening to his speeches, et cetera. You've talked about him being a radical, man of courage. You've talked about him being a pastor. You've talked about him being a man who would be in action and he would be challenging the church to feed the children right now. What do we say at this particular point before, and I want you to think about this because we're going to have to take a short break, right? But what do we think about what King would say today if he were here? When we come back in a few minutes, we want to pick up where we are leaving off on this question. If Dr. King were here today, what would he see and what is he likely to do? We're back on Another Perspective on WVON Talk Radio. Our call number is 773-591-1690. We have with us today to discuss Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., what lessons we learned from him while he was alive, coming out of the Civil Rights Movement. What can we say that he would say now, were he here in our Lord 2012, and what Dr. King would say for the future. I've got a caller, and I need to get Janice on. Janice, are you there? Janice, are you there? Janice, are you there?
I was 10 years old when Dr. King died, and my mom worked out at Oak Forest Hospital, and I remember she knew Miss Thompson. I remember those people that didn't make much money collected money and did things, but I think it's been a total failure. My mother went to school in the segregated South, and she had more opportunities under segregation than our young black children have today under so-called integration. We need choice in schools for our children. We need to have our young boys look up at E.D. Nixon and the Pullman Porters. We need them to know about A. Philip Randolph. We need them to know that there was class distinction in the South. Because remember, Vernon Johns was fired before Dr. King came because he wanted the elite blacks to work with the lower class blacks. And we didn't have as many illegitimate births at the time as we do now. We need to look at the black community and say, it's time for us to clean house. And I mean clean house morally. No race can succeed with the leadership being immoral. We have, as Reverend Jackson, a child out of wedlock. We need to tell our young boys. My mother told us when we were growing up as kids, I can't tell you not to have a man in the house, but I'm going to have one in there. We were taught by my grandparents who taught morals and values, and they lived them every day. We don't have that in the black community anymore, and our children have no respect for us. I was coming home from work one night. One of the little boys stopped me. He said, you've been walking that road for many years. I said, yeah, I can't retire. But he said, you know what, ma'am? You practice what you preach. I said, you're going back and forth to work. I try to talk to the young kids about getting an education and things. But they say, we talk one game, but we live another. We've got to change that. We've got to open up our churches to teach our young men that you can be a leader, and a leader is a man that goes into his home every night and feeds his family. A leader is a woman who doesn't bring other men over her children, but she sacrifices so that her children can be raised properly. And if she doesn't, the grandparents take over, and they don't look for a check from DCSS. They take care of their family because that's what we did back in the South under so-called segregation.
All right, Janice, thank you so much. I'm going to give you another, 15 seconds. You want to wrap it up?
Well, let me wrap it up by this notation. If we don't get control through schools and through other things, it's going to be worse than it is now. I never thought I'd live to see it. That we don't respect our elders on the train. They're cursing. Back in my day, the man at the tavern would tell you, get in school. I don't want you to be like me. But we've lost all that. And somehow we've got to get it back.
All right, Janice, thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye-bye now.
I wanted to read this quote from Dr. King. When scientific power outruns moral power, we end up with guided missiles and misguided men. When we foolishly minimize the internal of our lives and maximize the external, we sign the warrant for our own day of doom. And so what he was talking about is we have to have, as this caller has stated, a restoration of our moral order. And he talked about that a lot in Strength to Love and some of his other books. We have lost our moral compass in America. It's not just black people. The stuff that we show on television, we didn't have that in Dr. King's day. You didn't have underwear commercials even. And so we certainly didn't have the kind of openness that we now have and the disrespect that adults have for children.
Right.
And I think that what Dr. King was saying is you cannot keep looking at all of our scientific accomplishments, and when you look at our educational accomplishments, our kids are performing far less in America than any child globally because we don't compete well in English and in math and in reading and in science. Every other nation, organized nation, civilized nation performs better than the United States.
Is there a higher standard that members of the clergy must be at?
Absolutely.
Sure.
So,
Absolutely. Absolutely.
I mean, leaders must lead. And I think as Janice's point is, but we do have to learn how to fight within and without. I mean, we can't just simply focus on our internal challenges, which are many, and which we must. I think that's a spiritual battle, spiritual warfare. But we also can't take our eye off of the context that creates the challenges in which we live as well. We did not create the economic order. On the west side of Chicago, we're not responsible for 70% of the jobs leaving Austin and Lawndale between 1970 and 1980. We didn't close Sears and General Electric and Alden's and create really these inner city pathologies that make it difficult for people to do family.
So what would be the issues that Dr. King would be dealing with right now?
He would be dealing with this prison industrial complex where they are gone back to prison leasing, the old chain
When
gang.
you say they, who do you mean they?
America now has privatized many of our prisons, so much so that the new slave laborer is a prisoner, where they are putting corporate factories are being placed on prison grounds in South Carolina and across the South, so that a prisoner will maybe earn 65 cents an hour working for a company that used to pay a worker $18 an hour for the same job. Prisoners are
Wait a minute. Hold on. Now, I think you're talking real fast. Are you saying at this particular point that prisoners are making goods and services?
Yes, sir.
Goods and products, I should say.
Yes, sir.
For the private sector.
Yes, sir.
And those goods are being sold
Yes, sir.
by the private sector into the American economy and
Yes.
elsewhere? Is that what you're saying?
Yes, I am. Prison Blues, Victoria's Secret underwear. They're making computer chips in prison. They make
But
they make tires in prison.
well, how can they get away with that? How does that happen?
Because
You're
when
telling
you
me
have
that
when you allow the states to determine how they're going to create industries, they have this Wackenot Prison Corporation. It's on the New York Stock Exchange.
wait a minute. Hold on now, because
I'm just
this
telling-
is I'm delving into this way. So what you're saying is that if you go to jail to serve time in jail
For committing a crime.
for committing a crime,
Uh-huh.
you could end up in jail making products
Right.
for the sale into the marketplace
For profit.
For profit.
for profit.
Yes.
Hold
Yes.
on, wait a minute. And the wages that you make while you're in jail are below the minimum wage
Far
that
below.
you would be making outside.
Far
Far
below,
below, yeah.
and you won't be able to work
But-
in that industry when you get out.
It's the new Jim Crow.
It's
Huh?
the new Jim Crow.
Is that what is
Yeah.
in another book, the new
That's
Jim
what
Crow?
it is.
New
Yeah.
Jim Crow.
That's what
Michelle
Michelle
who wrote the
Alexander.
book, New
Michelle
Jim-
Alexander.
That is the point.
Huh?
That is the point. I think broadly, again, Dr. King looks at the Occupy movement, for example, in this day and age. And I think they're broad issues. This is one of them, radical reform of a criminal justice system that everybody knows, everybody agrees is unjust and disproportionately affects particularly black and browns in the urban areas. So, literally, the war on drugs was a war on blacks
Right.
and browns. But I think several things. Number one, King would address a really radical reform of the way we fund campaigns, because a lot of these
When
a
you
lot
say
of
fund,
this
you're talking about political campaigns, right?
too much money in the system, and the recent Supreme Court decision that allowed corporations to be persons with a freedom of speech has been absolutely disastrous. And there ought to be a national movement to scale that back, because the government no longer
All
represents
right,
the
so what
interests
you're
of the
saying
people.
is the Supreme Court of the United States of America said that corporations are now citizens and they can spend any amount of money they want
Unlimited amounts.
to, unlimited amounts of money. So does that mean that they are capable, that now private corporations are capable of buying the United States Senate and buying the United
No,
States Congress
have
and buying the
already-
President of
have
the United
already
States?
Already
bought it.
Huh?
Have already
Already
bought
bought
it before the decision came down. I mean, in fact, it points to undue influence of these corporations on the decision of the Supreme Court. In fact, the president chastised the Supreme Court unprecedentedly in a State of the Union address, because the decision so radically undercut the power of people's ability to influence their government.
The other thing, Dr. King would
You're
be
a lawyer
dealing-
now. What-
he-
yeah.
Well, Dr. King would be challenging the integrity of the Supreme Court. The highest court in the land has now shifted back to the right.
Right. When
based
you say
on-
back to the right, what does that mean?
That means that they're the most conservative right-wing court that we've had since.
Now, when you say right-wing court, what does that
Literally
mean?
against individual
They're
liberties,
against
right?
everything that we fought for, every right that we fought for, voting rights. They're trying to roll those back with voter suppression tactics. Every right that we fought for, even now, you have for voting right to vote in 27 states. You got to show a photo ID to vote. It's almost like a poll tax.
Well, they say that they want to make sure that no illegals that are voting. That's what I heard.
They ask people to get a birth certificate. In some states, it costs you $100 to get a birth certificate if you can find one. But if you like my grandmother was, their birth certificate was the Bible, where the midwife wrote in the Bible that you were born.
Yes.
And so you didn't have a birth certificate. Dr. King would also be dealing with this foreclosure. These banks were bailed out, and now they are foreclosing on innocent people, and you've been into this foreclosure. Dr. King would be challenging the right of the banks to not reinvest in the communities that they got the money from and the communities where they sit.
I mean, at bottom of that is the
that's the Occupy
concentration
movement.
of wealth. I mean, that's why we keep hearing about the 1%
And the
versus the
99.
99%.
Okay, so you're on the Occupy thing right
Yeah.
now.
and I'm
Absolutely.
on
Well, the
Occupy with it.
concentration of wealth, the large banks getting bigger. We had in this town the largest privately owned bank in America that was a fabulous community bank,
Yeah.
Park National Bank, that has been sucked up in this crisis
Right.
by the 5th largest bank in America, U.S. Bank.
Right.
And it's a travesty. The small banks that really provide what we call democratic capitalism, local access to capital, as a result of this crisis, instead of us decentralizing capital, we further concentrated it, which of course has cut people off from the kind of capital we need to really jumpstart the economy in these communities.
Well, so somebody said that, somebody told me, I don't think it was on this program, that this business of money in campaigns had really distorted the will of the people.
Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely.
And they said on this very show, Another Perspective, on WVON 1690 on your radio dial, they said that big oil, meaning the major oil corporations, had bought up the Republican Party and thereby had bought up all of the United States senators as well as the United States members of the House of Representatives that were serving. That's big oil. But they didn't let the Democrats off. They said that Wall Street had bought up the Democratic Party.
Pays both sides.
Had bought up the United States Senate, majority of the United States senators, as well as a majority of the United States members of the House of Representatives.
You see, everybody
wait a minute,
gets-
hold on. But notice this. In both instances, they were saying that both parties were now subject to money rather than the will of the people.
Well,
What do y'all have to say about that?
Anytime
Yes.
anytime a judge, a circuit court judge, has to raise almost $250,000 to run for office, how can that judge be impartial? Because now I have to get money from somebody who can write large enough checks so I
Yes.
can go on the
And
radio.
they're going to expect something for writing
And
that
they're
check.
going to
right?
expect something, and they're going to demand something. And so while we think when you appear before a judge and you don't think about voting for judges, they are going to be partial to those who pay the cost for them to be the boss.
And when
on
there's
those benches.
unlimited amounts of money that can be donated, it means with enough wealth, you simply pay both sides. You
Pay
never
everybody.
lose.
Yeah.
Doesn't matter who's president, because Wall Street has given money to the Democrat and the
And
Republican candidate.
Oh, wow.
And so the banks' will be done. It's interesting, just in the last few years, particularly when Bush was in office, if you look at the absolutely radical changes that affect common people that happened because banks had bought the Congress. Number one, these exorbitant fees that are charged for late fees. No longer does a check float 3 days. That kind of helped common people navigate
No, it
cash
floats 3
flow.
hours.
To get their money right away. I mean, all of this evidence that the banks have, and the financial interests have bought the government because they ruled basically contrary to the interests of the people.
And the other thing is student loan debt. Dr. King would be very concerned if pushing education, and these students are graduating, Dr. Finney, with $250,000 in student loans. If they got the degrees that Reverend Hatch and I have, they would be in debt without any scholarships up to $200,000.
And
Well, I
without
understand
job
that the Pell Grant,
jobs.
the Pell Grant was just increased to now $5,500. So that means that you now even borrow more money, or you can get more money. But anyway,
Yeah.
I got a couple of calls. I got some
student
callers,
loan
a lot of
debt
callers. Let
surpassed
me take
credit
one
card
of these
debt.
out here.
Yeah.
Ramona, are you there with us, Ramona?
Yes, I'm here.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, thank you. So I want to say thank you for this forum that you're holding. This and what you're talking about. It's really. I wish we could just have a forum where people can come and weigh out and give their views, because everything that your guests have said has been right on target. Everybody has kind of scratched the surface of what part of the problem is. When you talk about Dr. Martin Luther King, I don't only think Dr. Martin Luther King would be disappointing in us as a people, but I think Harriet Tubman and some of the other forefathers who paved the way for us to be in the position that we in would be disappointed in us also. One thing we've got to do, I think we've got to go back to Egypt. We've got to go back to where our foundation of which black people, when they came off the plantation during slavery, we had a connection. But now we're disconnected. We're disconnected because of the internet, MySpace, tweeting, and children don't sit down and have a family meeting where the family just discusses what happened in each one day during that period of the day. But we've got to teach our children that when I was growing up, it was a church, then it was family, and then it was a home play the role. We don't have that anymore. Okay. And until we can sit down and help bring one another along and help each other, we're still going to be disconnected.
All right,
so
Ramona,
I think what you're saying here today is a good thing.
Thank you very much, Ramona. Thank you so much, Ramona. Tommy? Tommy?
Hey, well, very, very quickly, Dr. Finney, I want to say good afternoon to you, to your guest. Reverend Jeanette, you know, I just love you to death for what you do at PUSH and for every time you come to Lagos. You know, I just want to leave you guys with this, you know. History bears the truth of our nation. It bears the truth of our plight. And any time as a nation of people, we forgot the number one issue. Whites do not like blacks, and for the love of God, I don't know why people cannot understand and recognize your neighbor might be white and they like you. But if the person who's making the decisions about your life, education, health care, the judicial system is someone who does not like you, this is why all of these generations, and we're still in the same thing. And it's amazing to me how come individuals like you, Attorney Jeanette, individuals like you, Dr. Finney, and also your other guests who's sitting there with you have to keep talking, begging, pleading, crying, keep on telling people the same thing over and over and over again, and then they do something like they did with the midterm elections, and here we are now about to go down, coming up for the election of the presidency, and you still got these idiots running around here not recognizing and understanding that people for the president of the United States of America is sitting up there talking about you on food stamps and everything else. And then I want to end with this. Somebody please tell me how on earth, if it's supposed to be for the people and by the people, how in the hell did the Supreme Court turn around, have lifetime appointments, and then say that a corporation could be an entity and pour as much money in it as they want? Bless you guys.
Thanks a lot, Tommy. You have invigorated our guest, Reverend Jeanette.
I can explain it. Anytime black people in particular refuse to vote and think about who is sitting in the Senate, we now have no African American in the 21st century in the United States Senate. President Barack Obama's Senate seat was given by us to Kurt. And we don't understand, it is the Senate that nominates people to serve on the Supreme Court. The president merely recommends, the Senate nominates and approves those judges that sit on the highest court in the land. They are the ones that shape the judicial policy for other lower courts. And everyone that's listening to this radio, you will appear in court, whether it's traffic court, divorce court, family court, probate court, chancery, before you ever see anybody else. And those are the places that we fail to focus. Vote matters. Voting matters.
Mm-hmm. All right, Dr. Hatch.
Well, you know, again, I think the caller's finger's right on the button. Again, we need to challenge people to get involved, number one, in just basic organizing in the community, which again is the legacy of Dr. King. Dr. King literally lived off of local organizations that made up the national movement. And
all right, now, you know, in our final minutes, and I'm not going to go to a break, we're just going to hang in here. In our final minutes that we have on this broadcast, we have to think about where King ultimately would be. No matter how bad things were, he always believed that there was hope.
There is.
That there was a sense that things could be better and we would have change anyhow for the good. So I want you to spend, and maybe I've overly stated this, and if I have, then you are welcome to disagree. But I remember every one of his sermons always ended with not only a statement of the problem, but also the challenge and the hope and promise that things were going to get better. So where do we go with this? What are we looking like for the future? What can we expect for the future as the two of you, both members of the clergy, both are mightily involved in the struggle for justice here in the United States of America, in the city of Chicago, one out of Push Excel and Dr. King's workshop, the other out of West Side Ministers Alliance and your own church and a host of other things. Talk to us now and talk to the listeners about what to expect for the future.
One of the things that Dr. King said is when people are mired in oppression, they realize deliverance when they have accumulated the power to enforce change. People have to realize, as Reverend Dr. Hatcher said, we have the power in our hands. We have the power with our dollars. We have the power with our marching feet. We have the power with our tweeting and our Facebooking. We have the power with our vote to implement change. We have to realize we're being oppressed. And then we have to act. You don't have to sit at home and be a couch potato. There's so many things we can do. One, every child needs to go to school every day so that they can learn. It's not about being poor. It's not about having a struggle. It's about having a mind made up. And then parents, if you don't have a job, you can create a job. There's enough snow today. I wouldn't be broke. I'd be shoveling somebody's snow. In the summer, I'd cut somebody's grass. We have to go back to cottage industries. Don't ask somebody to give you something you can get. And then you have to fight nonviolently to take control of your community. You should not have a gas station that we don't own. We should not buy cars, and there's no black car dealer in the city of Chicago. This is the only black-owned radio station, and it's struggling, WVON.
And we're going to help it not struggle, too.
It's the only one. And every black business ought to have an ad on WVON. This is our station. Without VON, we can't even get the word out.
Yes.
Dr. Hatch. If you wanted to be born in interesting times and really transitional times, these are the days. I mean, it's going to be a critical shift in the world. It's already happening. And Dr. King, I think, is as relevant today because he saw this shift, and literally this shift from north to south. I mean, when you look at what's really going on in the world, the emerging economies of Central and South America, across Africa, the emerging petrol states and mineral wealth countries, through the Middle East, through the Indian subcontinent, the Pacific Basin, and all the way out, it is the former colonies who are really rising in terms of global ascendancy. And we're really a third world people that have been in the first world. And this country is going under a population transition into really a black and a brown country.
All right, hold your point. We've got to have to take a call right now. DC, are you on? DC?
Hello?
Yes, DC.
Hello. As I listen more and more to the revealing of the corporate powers that is behind governments of the world, it gives me encouragement to know that politically and socially and economically, the revelation is coming to the people of who the true enemy of the world is. And I'm going to end with this here. Lastly, spiritually, when we talk biblically speaking about the spiritual struggle between Esau and Jacob, it's just a matter of time before spiritually the people are going to become awakened to that historical spiritual struggle between Esau and Jacob. And like Esau was promised the fatness of the earth in Genesis, Jacob, you got a prophecy and a spiritual mission too, and it's coming shortly. So look out, Esau.
Thank you very much, DC. Huey, this is Dr. Finney. Yeah, we've got 30 seconds before we end the program. You make your point, please.
Yeah, hi guys. How you doing?
Yes.
Right quick, I want to thank you for your guest. Right quick, I just want to speak right quick about what Dr. King probably really would be saying. Dr. King probably would be crying. And yes, I think that Dr. King would be very angry because actually, to be frank with you, when it comes to African Americans, we have allowed this country and its political corruptness to nearly destroy us.
All right. Okay, Hugh.
Yeah.
Now, let's go back in the closing minutes here. We've got a challenge, right? each one of you have seen, has seen, I should say, a vision for the future. And the question, I think, is what will it take to make that vision happen? What does it take, and what do we do as African Americans at this particular moment in history? What do we do in order to bring justice and freedom and equality to the United States of America, and even perhaps to the rest of the world?
I think our children are partially asleep, and I'm talking about the 20s and the 30-year-olds. It's their season, it's their time. We must challenge them and give them the platform. This is a fight that they must fight with us.
Our children.
It's their time. It's our children and some of our grandchildren. In the right age group, they have to take this on. Because it's a global fight, as Dr. Hatch has said, we have to understand the global connections, and we have to begin to fight using the technology that's available to us, using the information and the wisdom that our generation can provide. We can win.
Okay, and Dr. Hatch.
Well,
what do we got to do?
As Dr. Wilson said, I mean, the Occupy movement really is a global movement. Mm-hmm. The Arab Spring, social networking. I mean, it's really all one piece, and it's about a transition of the world, really from the former colonial powers now on the decline, and the rise of the former colonies. I think that we can help give leadership to this country and to the world, really to embrace the values, I think, of true democracy, true universal human rights, and really the same vision that Dr. King had as a global citizen first, that, to stand for what was right and to literally represent the kingdom of God coming into the world. That's still the vision of Beloved Community.
I got it. We're about to close out today. And this has been a wonderful opportunity, and I want to thank every one of our callers, and I want to thank our two guests, Reverend Dr. Jeanette Wilson and Reverend Dr. Marshall Hatch. Here's what I think. I think that Dr. King would be right now challenging the Supreme Court of the United States of America about corporate greed, and I suspect that he would be talking about sitting in, occupying the Supreme Court of the United States to force them to change the way they live and work. I believe that Dr. King would be calling a strike in the jails to stop the use of the inmates as slaves in order to produce corporate wealth. I believe that Dr. King would be calling for a shutdown in all the banks that have been robbing people and foreclosing on their homes illegally, or because they have not an ability to pay. I believe that Dr. King would be marching on every public schoolhouse in order to make sure that we have quality education for our children. And finally, I believe Dr. King would say, we got to occupy the church and get the church to wake up and get back in the fight. And guess what? This is Leon Finney, your host of Another Perspective. Now run and tell that.